So Navisworks as a product is quite an important product within the BIM arena. If anything, it's probably the most important software package that we've got within the Autodesk range for BIM, because it allows us to bring together data from multiple sources. It's not just about being able to bring in and federate information from an Autodesk platform, but also any software platform out there. And I'll show you the multiple file types which are actually available to us to be able to get all our information together, to then clash detect, timeline, visualize and understand how our building is going to work before we actually get to site. Okay, so first things first, a little bit about me. My name's Simon Dickinson. I'm the BIM Technical Manager here at Greytech. I've been using Navisworks now for around about 7 years. Originally it wasn't an Autodesk product. It's a UK-based company called Navis that developed it, based in Sheffield. In fact, Autodesk still have offices in Sheffield that cover the Navisworks product. There are 3 versions of Navisworks available to you. So we have the first one is Navisworks Freedom. This is purely and simply a viewer for what we call an NWD file format, and it's freely downloadable. So if you actually create any work within Simulate or Manage, we can send that to someone who can then review that information within Navisworks Freedom. The next level up from that, the one that comes with Building Design Suite Premium, and it comes with some of the other suites as well, is Navisworks Simulate. Now, Simulate will give you all the tools that Manage does except clash detection. So if you want to do clash detection, you need Navisworks Manage. And literally the only difference between Navisworks Manage and Navisworks Simulate is clash detection. So for those of you that don't like PowerPoints, you'll be pleased to know that that is actually the end of the PowerPoint. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually just going to flip straight over into Navisworks, and let's start to have a look at how Navisworks works and the sort of tools that are in here for us to interrogate our federated model. I've used the word federated. A lot of people sort of get confused about what a federated model actually is. Simply put, a federated model is a series of models that are brought together in a coordinated fashion. So if all our models sit together, so our structural engineers model, the architects model, the M&E model, if they're all sat there in the same space and we can start to review how they interact with each other, then that's referred to as a federated model. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to fetch the data in, and I've started with a blank project here, and I can come over here and I can start to append. You do have the option to merge, but the majority of the time we will append. If you merge it, it sort of limits the ability to update the data later on. So I can come in and I can append, and I can start to choose the files I want to append. Now I mentioned earlier that it doesn't necessarily have to be an Autodesk platform for the data to have come from our 3D data, and as you can see in this list there, the file formats are quite extensive. So we've got some Navisworks file formats at the top, and I'll explain shortly what they actually are. We can import 3D Studio files, A6 solids, we can pull in their A6 laser data, we've got MicroStation DGN support, there's pretty much the support for everything, and as of 2016 we now also have the ability to pull in a PDF. Now the PDF, and I'll show you why we've got this later on, the problem we have with PDF is PDFs are not scaled. It is basically a printout, if you think about it, from a drawing sheet. So the data that we're actually printing out will be at a scale. It could be, a view could be at 1 to 100, it could be 1 to 200. We don't actually know what that scale is without looking at the drawing sheet. The software itself definitely doesn't know what scale the image is. It'll know the size of paper, it'll know it's an A1 drawing, but it doesn't know the scale. So there's issues there, but we've got the tools in Navis to be able to change that. If there is a product that you're using and you cannot see it on the list, so say for instance you were using AutoCAD, well what we have for AutoCAD, there's a plugin, there's a Navisworks plugin which creates what we call an NWC file. So the NWC file, the Navisworks cache file, is a file format that we can export out of various other products using the plugin. If you're using Revit, you can either import the Revit file directly in, or we can export to an NWC. The reason we might want to export to an NWC is that the NWC is a read-only file format. It's a 3D file, but it's read-only. We can't edit the data that's in there. So some practices like to send an NWC because it means that whoever's using that data then can't manipulate it. They have to come back to yourselves to make sure that that's manipulated back at the source. If you do the Revit file and you import the Revit file, it actually creates an NWC in the background, but because you've got the Revit file, it will allow us to use a function called switchback, which will allow us to then take the information from Navisworks straight back to the original authoring package, and then we can make the changes in the authoring package and push them changes back in. So it gives us a direct workflow. And from a BIM point of view as well, it does support the importing of IFC. So if you're receiving the structural file in an IFC, or the architect's modeling in an IFC, so that's Industry Foundation class. And for those of you that are not familiar with IFCs, IFCs are like the DXF of the BIM world. It's the universal language, okay? It's basically what some people might have come across it as open source BIM, okay? So let's pull in a file, okay? So I've got various files here. I've got an NWC here for this architecture file, and we'll pull in the main architect's file for this particular building. So here's our building pulled in. I can hide the roof, so I'll just right-click on the roof and we'll hide this, okay? Notice it's only hidden the top level. I just need to change my selection resolution to first object so I can select the whole of the roof, and we'll hide that. There we go. So there's my roof. You'll also notice that if I go in here, supermarket's propagated with the equipment, and it's also got some columns in that the architect's chosen to draw in as well. Okay, so the next thing we can do is we can now start to federate data into it. So I'm going to go back to append, and I'm going to append in the structure file. I can actually append 2 files in or more at the same time, so as many files as I want. If they're in the same folder, let's pull the structure and the MEP file in, and as you can see, that's pulled that in. There's a little bit of a funny shimmering going on, and that's because I've got 2 floors in my supermarket. I've got the floor that the architect's drawn, and I've got the floor that the slab that the structural engineer's put in. I've just hidden one of them just so that it makes it a little bit easy to see what we're doing. So we've now got a federated model in here. We can now start to interrogate the data in here. First things first, if I come over to the selection tree over on the side here, you'll notice the 3 NWC files that I've pulled in. And we can start to look at each of these. We can look at the units and transforms, and this will actually tell us the origin of the file. So for the Revit users out there, you'll be aware that Revit has 2 completely separate coordinate systems. We have the project coordinate system, and we've got the shared coordinate system. When we actually export out our NWC files from Revit, in fact, I can actually get to the settings here because it uses a global settings. I've got my file readers and my Revit file. We can dictate when we export out which coordinate system we're using. So whether we're using the shared or the project. That will obviously dictate how it comes across. You'll have also maybe noticed as well that when I right-clicked on that and I went to my units and transforms, it's reporting that the units in that file are in feet. If you're using Revit, do not worry, that is correct. Revit's base units is actually feet, not millimeters. Unlike AutoCAD where it's unitless and we just tell a AutoCAD unit what it actually represents. If, however, you brought in maybe a 3D DWG, or maybe you brought in a file that had been created somewhere else, if it comes in at the wrong scale because Navis has read the scale wrong, then we can come in here and we can rescale it. Likewise, if maybe the coordinate system's out, we can calculate the difference in the coordinate system, and there's various ways of doing that within measuring, and I'll show you some of the ways we can measure later. But we can then start to look at where the origin is and what we need to do to change that to make sure that these align correctly. We can also then get back in touch with the original discipline and say, do you realise that you're not using the correct coordinates, that it will stand out a mile in here, because of course if it's in the not correct coordinates, it's going to be outside the building. Okay, so predominantly Navisworks is a review package. It is not a design package, yeah, and it's not designed as a design package as such. So if we find any issues in here, we cannot model, yeah. So has anyone else is frozen? I've just had a message to say that it may have frozen. Now show of hands just to make sure that we actually are still seeing the slides as they go through. Excellent, no we are. Okay, good. So it is a review package. The concept is that we're using this to review the design data, not to edit the design data. It may be that the contractor is the person that's reviewing this and they need to get back in touch with the architect or the structural engineer to make these changes. So we can now start to review this, and I'll go through some of the ways in which we review. So the first way that we can review an item is simply from a visual aspect. So I can start to look around the building, we can zoom in, I can rotate the model, and start to get an experience of how things are going together. Yeah, I might even, as I'm rotating around, find problems, just as we've got here with this beam. Okay, so I've visually found an issue by looking around. Okay, at this point I can now start to document how we want to resolve this problem. So just like we do on site, I can go to what we call a viewpoint and I take a photograph. Yeah, so I basically get my view, take a photograph, and it will generate an image of that. I'll just call it issue 1_0. Okay. I might then want to show another view of the same issue. So I might not just take the one shot, so we'll take another one just there, and I'll save that. It's going to be issue 1_1. And then I can review that around to here and maybe take a third shot. Now, as much as taking these screenshots is useful, an animation sort of highlighting it can sometimes be a bit better. Maybe it's a small area in a building and it's going to be very awkward to show exactly where that problem actually stands. So what we can do is, in my viewpoints, is I can actually add an animation, and we'll just call this issue 1, and then I can actually transfer these screenshots or my viewpoints into my animation, and the animation will use these as the base points for the animation, and it will create an intermediate animation between each shot. So if I just now go to my play button, it will actually now, hopefully you should see that just about, and it will play that across. Okay, so as we view that round, it's nice and easy to communicate these issues. You can then save the whole of this project out to an NWD, which could be open in Navisworks Freedom. Alternatively, what we can actually do is we can actually export this animation. So I could go to Output, and I could output this animation, and this animation then can be saved anywhere. We can make sure that the options are set so that the compression is decent, so it's actually an emailable file. Okay, and then we can, as I say, we can then save that out. I've noticed that some people are having a few issues with their connection. Just to let you all know, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in the next few days, so probably sometime towards the end of next week, I should imagine. Okay, so we can start to review our model by basically taking our shots, navigating around it and looking. We can also start to add a little bit more realism in the way that we work. So I can actually start to walk around the building. So if I choose my walk tool, as I now push my pair of shoes away from me, I can actually walk. And you'll notice that I'm actually walking above everything at the moment. I can look down using my scroll wheel. It's not very realistic, I'm floating on the roof. But what I can do is I can turn on some realism. So I'm going to turn on gravity. Gravity automatically turns on collision. It has to do this because if it didn't, I'd just simply fall straight through the floor and continue falling. So now if I walk forward, I can actually now start to experience my supermarket from a first-person point of view. And we could come down this aisle here. I can look up. We can see our issue, but I've got full control over how I can manipulate this. I could put the roof back on as well. The other thing we can actually do is we can actually turn this to a third-person view. So rather than having it at a view that's just first person, I can add realism. Now you might wonder why we would want to do this. This gives us a spatial awareness. So this character is to scale. So this avatar is actually to scale. So we can start to now understand the scale of this building. What I can also do as well is if I actually try and climb into a fridge, he will actually crouch. Yeah, and he'll actually try and get onto the shelves. The reason he does that is imagine I was in a plant room and I was trying to make sure that there was enough clearance that an engineer or an operative can actually get and work in that space. The other thing we can do is we can customize these characters. So if I just go to my current viewport, my collision settings here, we've actually got the ability to change his height. So maybe we want it to work to the 98th percentile or 95th percentile of humans, so we could raise him up to maybe a bit higher, a bit more than 6 foot. Maybe we're dealing with a school where we've got children there, so we can then reduce the character as well. You can also customize the avatars, so you can have as many different avatars in here as you need. So various different settings that we can come in and choose from. As I say, we can customize them. For one customer, I actually customized a avatar which was a wheelchair user. So we could start to then move the wheelchair around and understand if there was clearances and if the wheelchair could actually get through. You can also change their radius. So if our worker here has been spending too much money on pies, I can actually make him a little bit larger. Yep, so there we go. It's a bit plumper, and now we might have access problems. The tills in here are definitely too close together, and he actually has to stand on top of the tills, look, to get down that gap. So we can start to experience the store from a different perspective, if you like. So let's just set him back. Okay. Getting back to point 3. What we can also then do as well is you can record the way he walks. So as well as I could actually save this as viewpoints, yeah, and we could create a whole list of new viewpoints and then animate it. What we can also do is on the animation tab is actually a record button. If I actually hit record, I can actually record myself wandering down this aisle. If I then hit stop, it'll then create a new animation from it with each of the keyframes in question. Okay, so another nice way of just generating some information to communicate back to the design teams. What we also have under there as well as being able to walk, we can actually fly. Yeah, so a little bit different. So we can actually come up and we can then fly it around the site. Now, obviously, this is a slightly smaller model. Being able to fly around inside a supermarket. If you've got a very large site, it's a good way of being able to navigate the site. Okay, and again, we can record this as well. If I press and hold the middle wheel as well, you can do loop-de-loops and all sorts. Yeah, so if you want to start making yourself feel a little bit sick, then feel free. Okay, so that's the realism settings. Collision is a very useful one. If you've got gravity on, always have collision on, because if you don't, it doesn't work. Okay, so that's some of our review tools. Okay, let's just come back out of that. Okay, so that's navigating around our scene and being able to sort of start to interrogate the model. The other thing to be aware of as well is the BIM information that is available within the authoring package is available in here. So any information that was fed into the Revit model in this, if I go to my properties, I can start to view the information about this actual object. Yeah, so it's a Revit type, it's a circular diffuser, it belongs to the air terminals, yeah, and all the information. There's even the cost information. If the cost information had been propagated within Revit, it would have fetched it across to Navis. We also have the information about the system that it's on. So for any of you out there that are using the Revit MEP, you'll know that when we create a system, it gives it a system name. So this is on our supplier. If I select this diffuser over here, that's actually on our return air system. So all the information is coming across from there as well. The other information that will come across from there as well is any hyperlinks. So if this item had any hyperlinks, they would have come across. If I select this fridge here and we come across, I've actually got a hyperlink section. Notice if I select one of the other objects, this one doesn't have any hyperlink section at the top. It's because it hasn't got any added. Even though we've got them added on this fridge, it doesn't stop me being able to edit that link and add additional information. So imagine being able to use your Navisworks model as an O&M manual. So we can actually start to put in here now for this particular unit. That was I don't know if that's a shelf or I think it's shelves. We could actually put in here a link to the manufacturer's website. Okay, so it says link to file or URL. So this could be the manufacturer's website. So in this case, let's say it's greytech.co.uk. Okay, and we can put call it Greytech. And what I can also do is then I can add an attachment point for the link itself. So I'm going to go add and click on there, click OK. I'm actually going to move Greytech, make that the default. So what we actually have is we have the one at the top is the default one that we use. If I just go OK, I'm just going to turn my links on. Yeah, you'll notice that on here on this item there's 2 hyperlinks. So this fridge has just got one hyperlink. I've added in the second hyperlink here, which as you can see as I hover over says Greytech. I click on there and it will automatically now take me to the Greytech website. As I mentioned, that doesn't have to be a URL to a website. What we can also do is if I add that, edit the links, I can actually add in here a link to any file that I want. Okay, and it really can be any file. If you linked this to a DWG, it would just happily launch AutoCAD on the machine. So it'll launch whichever the authoring package is on your computer to open that particular file. But it doesn't have to be the files that are in that list. So you notice some audio, video, HTML, some documents. But it can be any file as long as you've got the software on your system, which is really, really useful. So the amount of additional information we can add is huge. A question I did get asked the other day was if I actually just navigated and let's have all files. And maybe I linked to, say, this CSV file. How do we make the path? At the moment, you'll know notice we've got an absolute path, but we might need it to be a relative path. So as long as we can actually just delete all that, as long as this is a subdirectory of the folder where the Navisworks file is going to be saved to, then this will be relative. So we can then copy and paste everything and all information onto a CD or USB stick, send that off, and then that information will be accessible when the model's actually open. Okay. When it comes to saving the files, which I'll talk about now, there are 2 file formats you can save. So if you imagine in Navis, there's 3 file formats to be aware of. We've got the NWC file, which is the file format which we're exporting out. So an NWC file will contain model data that we're importing into Navis. And then the 2 file formats which we would actually use to save are an NWF for Freddy and an NWD. Now if you're working on a project live, I highly recommend you use the NWF. The NWF is a file link file format. So basically the NWF only contains the information that we're generating in the Navis project. It contains no model information whatsoever. The model information will be stored in the separate files that we've linked in. The other file format we've got is an NWD. Now the NWD compiles all the data into a single file. So if I actually saved as an NWF, in fact I actually have an NWF here, this GF training, you'll actually see it's only 14 kilobytes. But yet if we created the NWD file, so the GF NWD, it's 6.3 meg. because that contains all the model information. It means that's a single file that I can now email to someone else to actually look at. In fact, if you're sending it to someone that's using Navisworks Freedom, Navisworks Freedom will only cope with an NWD file format. Okay, so that's the only thing that you can actually put into there. Okay, so all this information we can then start to save out. The other thing we can do as well with an NWD, instead of actually just saving as, we can publish an NWD. So if I go to output, we've got the ability to publish. This is quite useful because if we actually now publish an NWD file out, what we can actually do is we can start to put a little bit more information into the header page that pops up when you open it. You've also got the ability here to add a password. So we can password protect the data if we feel that it might get intercepted or if it's got sensitive information. Maybe it's a building that's now got sensitive information in and we don't want anyone else to be able to access that. It's 128-bit encryption, so it is well encrypted. The other thing we've got, and I think this is a brilliant idea, we can expire the file. How often do we find out-of-date information being used on site? What we can do here is we can expire that file. So as soon as it reaches that date, so if I actually expire it now, as soon as I save it, I won't be able to open it because it'll say that that file expired on the 4th. What a brilliant idea. We can guarantee that the information that we're putting out there, once it becomes out of date, say after a week or so, then we know that no one's going to be able to open that file. So I do quite like the fact that we can publish that. Okay. Other things that we can do before we look at sort of some of the other tools. So when we look at the reviews, I'm just going to turn my links off. You notice as I zoom out, my links sort of disappear. It's not a graphical glitch. That is because I've got Navis to only show me 20 of these links at a time. So I can actually stop it filling my screen up. So I'll just turn the links off. But we might want to start doing some reviews. So we might want to start to do some measuring. Okay, we might want to create some red lines because what we normally do is redline on things. So we've got a review panel here, and I can start to do some redlining. Now, the one thing to remember about redlining is you can only do redlining on a viewpoint. But as of 2016, one of the nice features is as soon as I start to do some redlining, let's put some text in there. Oops. That's if we finish that and put some text. Hello, yeah. What it will have actually done, if I just go to my view, windows, and just show my saved viewpoints, yeah, it's actually created this view. So it's automatically created that view for me. If I pan away from it, look, you'll notice that the redlining disappears. If I click back, it's actually there. So I've actually redlined, if you like, on that photo, but nowhere else. So we can start to then put some review. The other thing as well is your red lines don't have to be red. Your red lines can be any colour that you like, okay, which can be also quite useful. So other things we can do within here, we can start to add tags. So tags are a little bit like a link, but they will allow us to add some comments basically. So we can write a comment, but we can then tag it to an item. Other things we've got is some measuring tools, which are obviously very, very useful. And I can start to then go to measure point to point. There's a few different styles. So I can measure from that point to that point. Yeah. So that shelf is 2.660. Notice down here in the corner it's giving me the XYZ direction of the measurements. So it's just in the Y direction. Perfect. We've got a UCS window being shown here so you can actually see what's going on. I can move around that, but if as soon as I do another dimension, just to be aware, that dimension will disappear. Unless I convert it to a red line, in which case then I can start to put multiple dimensions into here, okay? So we need to be a little bit careful about where we snap into. So that's our measure. I've got point to multiple points, so if I wanted to know the distance from this point here to that shelf, the next shelf up, or the next shelf up, it will keep the base point, if you like, in the same place and just give me access to measure between two different points. Point line, imagine I'm trying to work out a fire escape route. Every time I click, it will just measure the length of the line that I'm actually creating. We've got an accumulative, multiple straight lines, it'll give me the value. Angular, exactly what it says on the tin. So if I wanted to work out the distance between that point, and that point, there we go. So at least I know my shelf's level. And we've got an angular one, an area one, sorry. And as soon as I've clicked more than 3 points, it'll then start to give me the area inside that boundary. Again, quite a useful little tool. There's some other quite nice tools in here as well. So for instance, if I just rotate my model down, and maybe I want to know what the distance is between this diffuser and the floor. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure point to point. Yeah, I'm going to measure from the edge of that diffuser somewhere on the ground. You notice it's detecting the ground, but is it 5 meters? Is it 7 meters? How do I know I'm getting that vertical? Okay, if I click in there, it actually gives me the value there on the Z. So it's actually 4.5 to that point in the Z. But as soon as I then start to, maybe if I just redline it, it's not giving me that information. That information is just temporary. But what I can do is I can use the lock, and I can actually lock the axis for the dimension I want. So in this case, I'm only interested in the Z value. So I'm going to lock the Z value for this object, and I can then say, right, I want to know the distance from there to the floor. And you'll notice it's drawing a vertical blue line regardless of where I actually click. So when I convert to red line, it'll give me a dash, 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 dash to the point that I clicked, but it's actually giving me the vertical distance. Yeah. So if I go back to that view, because it was redlined, I can guarantee that that is the vertical distance down from that surface. Okay. So there's various different tools we can start to review. Of course, there are a whole host of other tools that we've got available. Okay, I've already mentioned this Clash Detective button is only available in Manage, but the whole interface that we're looking at is exactly the same in all the other products. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the other tools quite quickly, but the tools that we've got in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come into my browser here, and I'm going to hide two of the models. So the only thing that I've now got in here is my structural model. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to be able to now create a timeliner. So I want to look at how we're going to construct this. So here's my timeliner tools. Let's just place them in there, and I can start to create a timeline. Two ways to create the timeline. We can create this completely manually, the way that I'm going to do here now, or what we can do is I can actually link it to a data source. Microsoft Project, Asta Power Project, but we can start to link a project plan actually directly into Navis. We can also start here with maybe a basic project plan and push it out to our planning software. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some tasks. And the first task I'm just going to create, let's do the foundations. So what I want to do is I want this task to be the foundations, maybe just the piles. Yep, so let's just distinguish that off. I then have a planned and an actual start. So I don't know the actual start, we're not actually building this, but let's go to the planned, and I can start to now set up in here my project timings. So it's going to take us a week. Yeah, I know it's not realistic, but we can set that up. So there's now my times. If I just go add a task, you'll notice that over here, it's started to produce a Gantt chart, and it's put in there this bar to represent them timings. I then have a task type. So what are we going to do? Is it going to be construction? Is it going to be demolish? Is it going to temporary? And I'll show you a reason why we might want to set that up in a second. Because obviously we might have an existing building we want to demolish, but we might have temporary equipment as well. So I'm going to link in a second things like the site cabins, site equipment, and we can start to pull that in and understand how our site can cope from a construction point of view. So this really then is, you can almost then start to think about not just the construction of the building, but also the health and safety on site as well. So what I'm going to do is I want to construct the foundations, and then it says attached. And this is where we need to specify the type of object or the objects that we want to add in. So if I just go back to here, yeah, in fact, let's just go back to, let me just clear that little dimension that appeared there. So if I select this object, and let's look at its properties. This is the information about this pile cap, yeah? So this is where it's called pile. Now the one behind it is also called pile. So what I would like to do is select everything that's got the name pile in there. So what we can do is, we've got the ability to create selection and search sets, okay? So what I could do is, before I just do a search, I could select a manual selection of items, and I can save that selection, yeah? And this is a manual search. Manual selection. The only time that selection changes is if someone deletes one of these from the original package. If someone adds a new pile that I'm interested in, it will not automatically add it to the selection set. If I want to be a bit more intelligent on that, I can come into here, into my find items, and I can find item where item name contains the word pile. And I can say, right, find all. And if we look in the background, you'll notice it's found all of them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually save that as what we call a save search set, yeah? So we'll call that all piles. Now the big advantage of doing it this way is the fact that all piles, if the structural engineer decided they needed to add another pile because maybe the facade's extended, then that pile would automatically be added into this. Every time I run this, it reruns the search, okay? And it will add it then, of course, wherever that search set's being used. So what I'm going to do is, let's just unpin that. So here now on my timeline where it says attached, I can come in, right click, attach to set, all piles, okay? And that has now added that in, and it will always check to make sure that it's correct. So then we can start to add in some other information. So there's various things in here that I want to add. So I can manually select these. I want the slab edges, the other part of the ground beams, and so framing, slab edge, and the floor. Yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all of these to this second task. Now it says explicit selection. That's because I've made the decision about what's going to be added there. So let's just carry on doing this. So this is going to be the slab, and we'll start doing that on the 11th, and we'll finish that by the 16th, and we need to make sure that it's a construction task, okay? Then what I can do is I can add a couple more tasks. I won't go too far into this, just for the sake of time. So we'll have our columns, and then this one can be the main frame, and this next one will be the roof. Okay, so I can then specify my dates, start doing that before the other bit's finished, 9th, 15th to the 21st, the 21st to the 25th. I expect him to work Christmas Day, pay him double time, and then the 28th until, say, the 2nd of January. So I've now started to set this up. I've just got to set what I'm actually adding in here. So let's just go to construct, construct, construct. Okay. So again, I just need all my columns. Yeah. So I can actually do this, and I can actually use my select same. Yeah, with the same name. That's another way of doing it. And then I can just drag them across. Then we've got these, the frame. So again, select same name. Yeah, and we'll drag them across. Okay, and then again we'll do the same with, if I want to select all of them, which in this case is the whole of the cellular beams. Yeah, hopefully that's not selected all of them, has it? So there's another level of, I'll select them and the eaves. Okay, and them and the RB2s, the plant. Okay, and then I can drag that in as well. So now all my elements that I want on the different layers are actually in there. Okay, there are ways of actually checking as well to make sure that you've actually got everything attached as well. Yeah, So basically, if I go find items, I've got attached or not attached. If I go attached, I would hopefully expect to find everything selected. Yeah, there's an object there that isn't selected, therefore that object is not going to get constructed. So again, just quite important to make sure that you can check. I'm not going to do anything about that one, I'm just going to leave that one. But now what I can do is, I can go to my simulate, and I can start to simulate the construction of this project. And as you can see, everything's grayed out at the moment. It's all green. Green's a good colour because it means I'm starting it on time. This assumes that I've actually got set up in here. If I had an actual end, I can then compare the actual start and end dates to the planned start and end dates and start to colour code this to show me where I'm behind and where I'm ahead. If I just hit play, this will now play through. Once it's completed the construction of the item, it will end up with its physical appearance. And we can see now that the piles are in, the graph is going in at the same time as some of the columns. And we can break this down to whatever the level of detail we want, and we can go to a very, very fine level of information, okay? Once we've got our timeline set up and we've got this basic Gantt chart, I can actually then export that out to Microsoft Project or CSV, which I can pull into another planning software as well. Okay, so we can go into as much detail as that as possible. Just close that down. The other thing we can do, as I mentioned as well, is it's not just about fetching the modeling. So I could actually come in here and append. I've got some equipment in here. Notice these are SketchUp files. I've got quite a lot of these SketchUp files which work really, really well. So if I came down and I looked at things like a small cabin, the small toilet block, and also the site signs. I want the site cabins as well. Let's just import these. So these are just SketchUp files. Let's just come out of my first person. Let's turn the first person off. Okay. So what we've actually got, if I just zoom out, here we go. So I now have these additional items. I can come to my site cabin, item tools, and we'll just move that. Yeah. So I'm actually moving this is a manual way of moving the coordinate systems for the items. And we have, yeah, we could even start to stack them on top of each other. Okay. So we can now start to put together our site equipment. Yeah. And we can then start to look at how the site's going to work, how that's going to actually fit on site. There's all sorts of other temporary equipment that you can pull in. You could even model it yourself for items that you can't find, but the concept of being able to build your site and look at it from access and health and safety point of view is very, very important. The other set of tools that I'm going to show you that we can play around with our federated model is the quantification tools. Okay. Now the quantification tools are actually added. Let's just remove these a second. Let's just delete them. And let's also turn back on. So let's just do an unhide all. Okay. So here's our full model. Now the quantification tools were added a couple of years ago. We started adding them, and a few features came in each year. What they were doing is they were taking all the functionality from a product called QTO, Quantification Takeoff, and move it into Navis. As of this year, now that we've got the PDF import, we now have everything that was in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of things about quantification and then show you the easiest way to get quantification out of a 3D model. So I'm going to go to quantification, and I can just close that down. And the first thing we need to do is set up how we're going to do our quantification. Now quantification by default uses a catalogue, and the idea is that these catalogues we start to build up, and then for each project we can start to use our own internal catalogue. So a catalogue will contain, maybe we have a particular type of door that we always use, or a particular range of doors. All the information about that doors will be in the catalogue. So when we go to click on a door, we can tell that door is actually an XYZ from the doorman, whoever. So we can actually make sure that we're product specific then for the actual items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with this uniformat catalog. It's just a sample catalog. Just click next. Just wait for Navis just to catch up a second. Next thing we do is tell it what project units we wish to use, and that's it. Simple as. So I can hit finish on that, and then it gives us these subcategories. So what I could then do is I could then start to look at taking off an individual item. So what we've got here is I've got the substructure, foundation, standard foundations. Yeah, I could select this pile, right click, and I could then quantification, I could take off to standard foundations, or the fact that that is a single or a two pile cap, I could go to my item catalog and create a new item under there that's going to be color coded, yeah, any color I want. So I'll do it purple, and I could then rename that to two pile stroke cap. So I now have that set up as an item. I can go back to my quantification workbook. I can right click. I can then quantification take off to two pile cap. And again, anywhere where that is, I can come in, quantification, take off to two pile cap. So there's lots of things that I can actually start to maneuver around in there. If I just change my view so that I'm actually in shaded mode, you'll notice that each item that's been taken off has automatically been assigned the color that I told it to have before. So really quite powerful. The next thing that I can do is hide that. So rather than have it color coded, if I just go to hide takeoff, it will actually hide the items that I've already taken off. So it means I can't accidentally take it off twice. If you do take an item off twice, we do, and it will let you do it if you're not careful. We can then do check for analysis changes, and if you do that, it'll actually make sure that you haven't counted something twice. So there are tools in there to stop that happening. And what I am going to do is I'm just going to right click on there, just delete them takeoffs, so I'm not going to take anything off. The easiest way I find to actually do this, to do the takeoff, is if I just select everything, I right click, I can go to quantification and I can take off to new catalog item. So what this means is every time it finds an item that I haven't got a catalog item for, so presuming I've named it correctly within Revit, it will basically generate a level, a view and an item for it. So if we actually look down here, it's broke it down by the architect's model, the levels, etc., and then the items that are actually on that level. So if I go to level 0, I've got some ceilings, got some columns, some rectangular columns. And you can see here it's got different rectangular columns, and then here's the ones it's meant, each one it's counted. So it's taken it all off, it's all disappeared. So what can I actually do with that? Yeah, so there's now fully color-coded model. I'm just going to change my appearance back to the model. I can actually now take this out. So I'm actually going to come to the end and I'm going to export this out to Microsoft Excel. New quantity report, hit save. I want it to automatically open this up once it's finished. So let that just work through. There's a fair bit of information, but it's actually extracting out at the moment. Open after exporting, yes. And this will now open Microsoft Excel. So here we have a full quantity breakdown of every item that's actually in this federated model. So it's not just looking at the architect's model, looking at absolutely everything. So if I come down this list, we'll find an item 59 of, and in the project that's 59 universal columns at this size. Okay. So each item has been listed. So we can even use this then from a QS point of view where all the wall volumes will have been. So if I look at this basic wall rain screen cladding, we've got a length, we've got a height, we've got the area, but all this information, we've got the volume as well, but all this information is there, so we can then start to use that within a QS's package to do that. Okay, so we don't want to save that. Right then, so the last thing that I want to show you is the clash detection tools. Yeah, so this is the tools that are only available within Manage. but these are incredibly powerful tools. Now, the reason that it's so powerful and so clever in the way that it works is clash detection in Navis helps you to manage the change. It helps you to manage the problems that you find. So I'm going to go to my clash detection, okay, and I'm going to create a new clash, and I'm going to clash my steelwork against my supply air. So basically I want everything on my supply air system to be clashed against the structural model. So what I need to do is I need to somehow be able to select just the supply air. So this is, again, I just come back out of there a second, where my search items come in. So what I want to do is I want to check where the system type, yeah, name equals, well, I just need to delete that top condition, so where system type name equals supply air. Yeah, notice it gives me all the varying options that it could be. So the system type name can't be anything other than these. I could put one of the other conditions for searching, but I just want all the supply air, okay? And then we'll find all, okay? So I now know that that has got everything in I need, and we'll just go to my sets, and I'll just do a save of supply air. Okay. If I want to just double check what's in supply air, I actually have this button here, which is the selection inspector, so I actually know that it's actually selected something. Yeah, it's useful just to check that it wasn't selecting nothing. I could have selected a system that maybe had one item on it and it was the wrong system. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to hide our roof just so that we can see inside. Okay, because this is where we're looking at. It doesn't really matter about hiding the roof, as you'll see in a second. So let's do now my, oops, helps if you click on the right icon. Got a clash detection, structure against sets supply air. I want surfaces against surfaces, and then I can set the type of object that I want. I've got hard and hard conservative. They're very, very similar in what they actually do. I can then check that against a tolerance. So I want a hard clash, but it's only a problem if they clash more than 5 millimeters. If they're only just touching each other by 5 mil, then there's not really an issue there. The next thing we've got is the ability to check for clearance. So we can basically say anything that's not got a 5 millimeter clearance between them is a problem. And we can also check for duplicates. So where maybe we've got a bit carried away. This is quite useful if you're doing quantification. If you check for duplicates, it means you're not taking off the same item twice. Yeah, I already showed you the fact that the structural engineer has got columns, and so has the architect. When I did my quantification takeoff, I counted both columns. So I can actually look for duplicates in the same place to make sure that I'm not counting things twice. Okay. I can also link it to the timeliner. So imagine that I've got a tall building going up and I've got some site equipment. So I've got maybe a tower crane hanging over the building. At which point does that tower crane get in the way, need to be moved? I can actually then calculate the exact time within the project plan that the clash occurs as well. Let's just do a hard clash, 5 mil, and I'll just run the test. Okay. And for me, luckily, it's only found 2 problems. Yeah. And the 2 problems are the ones that we know about. Look. So if I come into here, there's clash number 1. Yeah, clash number 2. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a bit weird, and you can only just see it. It's actually just flipping between the 2 sides. I could actually then dictate where I actually want that view to come from, and it will remember the change. Yeah. So it's actually switching across from the 2. So I've now found the 2 issues. I could search for more. If I did the supply air and return air, there's a lot more issues. But I can now start to review these. Several things I can do. I can add a comment. Yeah. I can change its status from new to active or approved. But I'm going to leave it new. I'm going to let Navisworks control this. But more importantly, I can assign this issue. So I'm going to assign this to myself. Yeah. Please, can you resolve? And we can do the same thing here. So I can assign this second one as well. I'm going to assign this to Simon Dickinson. Please fix I can now publish this as a report. And I can actually write a report out, and we'll give it the same name. I'll save it to my desktop. And what that will do is it'll actually generate a nice HTML report for me. So let's just come into my desktop and just do an F5. One of the files hasn't come through yet. There we go. And here we have a report. It's giving me the grid reference. It's giving me a thumbnail that I can click on, and it'll actually blow that up so we can actually see exactly where them two issues are. Yeah. We've got the location listed in here. We've got the items in question. We've got the Revit ID, so we can even search them in the Revit file. And we've got the comments, including who's assigned it, yeah, who actually did the assigning. I actually assigned it to myself, and the information about what needs to be done. Okay. So what we can then do is we can come in and we can fix this problem. So a little bit of magic going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close that down. I'm just going to save this as an NWF, and we'll just save it in there, and we'll just call it untitled. Okay, close that down. Just go new. The reason I need to do that is because I need to now come to this folder here and just rename the data. So notice I've got a fixed version of a structure. So I'm just going to rename this file to broken. I'm going to rename this file to just structure. So this is, we have to assume that the file name is going to be the same. So even if you receive a file name with an updated file name, to update it in Navis, we just need to replace the exact file in there with the same name. So now if I go open, let's open this untitled. Okay, if I pull this in, lo and behold, the problem's been fixed, because the structural engineers very kindly put a cellular beam in there to actually eliminate the problem. If I go back to the clash detection, notice I've got an exclamation mark. Navis knows that this file is not the same file that we did the original clash detection on. Okay, so I can now start to look in here at the original results, but if I come here, I can now update it. So I want to update all, because we might have multiple criteria set up in here, and I want to do an update all. I now have two issues that are resolved. So luckily for me, in this instance, that fix has resolved each one. If, however, that fix had have caused a knock-on effect, because we all know how it works in the real world, one solution might actually cause us to have other issues. Well, then what we've actually got is we've got the ability to see where the impacts have happened. So it might then say, yeah, you've fixed 2, but you've created another 3 problems. If there was more than 2 and they hadn't been resolved in this particular update, they would become active. Other things I can do is I can say that I've reviewed them and I can approve them. So if I look at a problem and I decide that it's not really an issue, then I can approve that. So that's me saying it looks like there's an issue there, but there isn't. What you can also do is when you change the status as well, is you can automatically change it to be resolved. Imagine I've been updated by the structural engineer, say, oh yeah, I've already fixed that. The next model you get is going to be refixed in it, so I can assume that's correct and resolve it. If, however, that isn't resolved in the next one, that will become a new problem, because it will say this was supposed to be resolved and it isn't. And this is the key feature to the way that Navisworks clash detection works. It is constantly making sure that you manage the problems that it's finding. The one thing I don't recommend doing is when you actually run a, if I had a new test, as we do sometimes get people that will do this, and they'll clash detect everything against everything, yeah, and they will run that through, and they'll end up with, in this case, I've got 750 clashes, which isn't too bad, but I did have one project that had 22,500 clashes, of which probably 22,000 of them were not issues. It was because we clashed everything against everything. So there was various issues with steel work coming through a concrete slab, because we don't tend to cut the openings out in the slab. So do be aware that sometimes when you run a clash detection, it is going to find things that are not clashes, hence the reason why we have the approved tab. But it's best not to go over the top. What you can do is, which is really useful as well, is the search sets that I was setting up before. So if I just go to my manage sets, I can actually take these and I can export all these search sets out, which means if I start a new project, I can rerun these search criteria. If each of our projects is working in a similar fashion using similar software coming in, i.e. it's all coming from maybe Revit or it's all coming from one particular source, we can explicitly set up search sets which will accommodate us for multiple projects. We can also do the same with our clash detection as well. So I can actually export my clash tests. If you then start a new project, it's very quick to import your search sets, import your clash tests, and then it's going to automatically start to update itself. There are a few other tools in Navis, which I'm not going to go into this morning. We've got a render engine and the ability to create animations and scripts, so we can actually have a site equipment animated and moving around, which we can actually link into the timeline. So at a certain point of the timeline, we could maybe have the site cabins move across the site to a different location by actually having an animation in there for that. So that's everything that I wanted to show you this morning. Hopefully it's been a real insight and giving you a good understanding of how Navis works with these federated models. I believe I did have a few questions coming as I was talking, and what I will do is I will aim to answer them questions and get back to the various people on that. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the question box and I'll answer them after the webinar, or alternatively you can always contact me on my email address there. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Again, I hope it's been useful to you, and see you all again on one of our other webinars. Thank you.